In a valley where the snow never melts and the pines keep their secrets, a young woman was asked to marry a man who could not speak, could not see, could not even wake. Yet the mountains had other plans, for in silence, hearts sometimes speak louder than the world ever could. The wind cut through Raven's Hollow like a sharp blade, rattling the shutters of the small Williams estate. Snow lay thick on the ground, and the towering pines loomed over the valley like silent guardians. Inside, by the crackling fire, Marion Williams clutched a letter so heavy with expectation it felt as though it could crush her chest. Marion, you were to marry Asher McKinnon. The words blurred before her eyes. Asher McKinnon, a man she had never seen, lying in a coma in the McKinnon estate, a mansion perched like a crown of stone on the cliffs above Raven Peak. The McKinnons were proud and wealthy, their influence spanning the valley. This union was meant to save her family from financial ruin, but to Marion it felt like a prison disguised as salvation. She paced the room, her silk slippers leaving faint tracks on the worn wooden floor. Her mother, frail and tear-streaked, hovered nearby. "Marion, it's for the family. We cannot survive without the McKinnons," she whispered, her voice trembling. Marion wanted to protest, to scream against the injustice, but she could feel the weight of generations pressing down upon her. Duty was a cruel companion, and she had no choice but to obey. That night, wrapped in her heaviest cloak, Marion mounted the carriage that would take her to the McKinnon estate. The journey was treacherous, the snow knee-deep in places, and the icy roads winding along sheer cliffs that dropped into the abyss below. Her heart raced, but not entirely from fear. There was a strange, thrilling anxiety in venturing into a world she had never known, toward a man she did not yet know, yet whose fate was now entwined with her own. By dawn, the carriage arrived at the massive McKinnon gates. The mansion was a fortress of gray stone, flanked by snow-laden pines and sheer cliffs. Icicles hung like crystal daggers, and the mountains loomed over her like silent, judgmental spectators. The caretaker, a tall man with cold, piercing eyes, greeted her with quiet respect. "He is resting," he said. "You may see him." Marion stepped into the grand chamber, where Asher McKinnon lay swathed in white linens. His face, pale and still, radiated a strange magnetic strength. Even unconscious, he dominated the room. She approached cautiously, knees trembling, heart pounding in her chest. The ritual was simple, a symbolic kiss meant to bind their fates and fulfill her family's contract. Marion pressed her lips to his softly. In that instant, the impossible happened. A shiver ran through him, a tightening of his fingers. The faintest flicker of life, almost imperceptible, yet unmistakable. Marion's breath caught. Could it be that the mountains themselves had intervened? Marion awoke to a world still hushed beneath winter's embrace. The snow blanketed everything, but within the McKinnon mansion, a different warmth had begun to stir. She found herself wandering the corridors, drawn toward Asher's chamber more than duty demanded. Each glance at him, still pale, still weak, filled her chest with a strange, aching longing. The man in the bed was a mystery, a storm of strength she could feel even in sleep. Days passed in silence and slow unease. The staff whispered behind closed doors, careful not to meet her eyes. She understood their caution. Asher McKinnon had been the pride of Raven's Hollow before his accident, and his slumber had become legend in the valley. One evening, as a storm raged outside, Marion sat by the window, the candlelight flickering across the frost on the glass. Snowflakes swirled like dancers in the wind. She whispered to the storm, "Wake, Asher. If you can hear me, wake." The night was still. Then, a twitch of fingers, a groan, low and uncertain. Marion's heart leapt. He had moved. By the next morning, Asher's eyes opened, stormy gray, sharp and unyielding. His first words were a hoarse whisper. You're here." "Yes," Marion replied, trembling. "I am." It was the beginning of a connection neither could have foreseen, one that would grow beyond duty, beyond obligation, into something infinitely more intimate. Chapter 3. Winter's Touch. Winter in Ravenshallow was harsh and unrelenting. The mountains pressed close, their peaks sharp against the gray sky. Snow drifted endlessly, piling against the edges of the mansion, and the world seemed frozen in time. Marion spent her days learning the mansion's secrets, the grand library filled with leather-bound tomes, the cold, echoing hallways, the small chapel where the McKinnons had prayed for generations. And always she found herself drawn back to Asher. At first, it was small gestures, brushing a stray lock of hair from his forehead, holding his hand as he struggled to sit upright, leaning close when he whispered a single word she barely understood. Each contact made her pulse quicken. The tension simmered, quiet but insistent. One evening, as the wind howled outside, Asher managed a soft laugh, the first she had heard. It startled her, then made her chest ache with a strange joy. You have a stubborn heart," he said, eyes twinkling faintly. "And you have a dangerous one," I replied, heart pounding. The firelight danced across his face. In the shadows, they began to understand each other without words. Every glance, every brush of hands, every shared silence became a conversation. The storm had passed, leaving Ravenshallow coated in crystalline frost. The sun rose pale and hesitant over the jagged peaks, casting long silver shadows across the snow. Marion stepped onto the balcony of the McKinnon mansion, her breath forming clouds in the frigid air. The world below was a frozen kingdom, untamed and beautiful, and for a moment she wished she could escape into it, away from duty, away from the contract that had bound her to a man she barely knew. Yet when Asher appeared behind her, his presence was like gravity, pulling her back to the reality she could not deny. "Beautiful, isn't it?" His voice was low, roughened by days of silence, but there was a softness to it that made her pulse quicken. "Yes, it's alive somehow," Marion replied, shivering from cold and anticipation alike. He moved closer, careful and deliberate, the tension between them palpable. The space between their bodies seemed charged, every glance, every motion a spark. Her hand brushed his sleeve accidentally, and he did not pull away. Instead, he looked down at her with a storm of emotions in his gray eyes, curiosity, longing, and something deeper she could not name. "You're different from what I expected," Asher said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Stronger than I thought." Marion's lips parted, unsure what to say. How could she tell him that he had stirred more than life in his body? He had awakened something inside her, too. The morning passed with cautious conversation, small gestures and lingering glances. Marion noticed the way Asher's eyes followed her as she moved through the room, the way his hand hesitated near hers, as though craving contact, yet respecting distance. Every movement, every word made her heart ache with anticipation. As night fell, the mansion was silent except for the crackling fire. Marion sat beside Asher on the chaise, a blanket draped over their shoulders. Her fingers brushed his, tentative, almost shy. "You know," Asher murmured, "I think the mountains chose you as much as they chose me." Marion's breath caught. "Me?" she asked. "Yes, you are the only one who makes the silence feel bearable," he admitted, his gaze softening. The words were a caress. Marion felt warmth bloom in her chest, spreading through her like sunlight piercing the frost. And then, instinctively, she leaned closer. Their lips met in a hesitant, almost reverent kiss, a kiss that spoke of unspoken promises and fragile beginnings. For a moment,
Time itself seemed to pause. Outside, the pines swayed in the wind, keeping their secrets as they always had. Inside, Marian and Asher discovered a new language, one of touches, glances, and the quiet pulse of hearts awake.
Days turned into weeks. Ravenshallow remained buried in snow, the valley isolated from the outside world. The McKinnon mansion became a world unto itself, and Marian found herself exploring not just the house, but the depths of Asher's mind and soul. They began to share stories, whispered by firelight late at night. Asher spoke of childhood adventures in the mountains, of hidden caves and secret streams. Marian told him of her family's struggles, of dreams she had never dared pursue. In their conversations, the barriers of duty and obligation began to crumble. One evening, a firestorm howled outside, rattling the mansion walls. Marian and Asher huddled together near the hearth, warmth from the flames mingling with the warmth of their growing closeness. "You frighten me sometimes," Marian admitted, voice trembling. "How so?" Asher asked, eyes searching hers. "Because I feel like I'm losing myself in you," she whispered, words barely audible. He reached out, fingers brushing a strand of hair from her face. "And yet you've never been more alive," he murmured. The tension between them thickened, a delicate, thrilling ache. Their kisses became longer, more insistent. Touches lingered, hands hesitated near forbidden places. The mansion, the snow, and the mountains themselves seemed to conspire to bring them together, isolating them in a cocoon of intimacy. Yet, despite the growing desire, both were careful, slow, savoring each moment, each whisper, each stolen glance. In the frozen silence of Ravenshallow, love was not rushed. It was cultivated, nurtured, and allowed to blossom like a rare flower in the snow. Ravenshallow remained buried in a pristine white blanket, the valley silent except for the whisper of wind through the pines. Marian and Asher had grown inseparable in the quiet of the mansion, but the outside world still loomed. Letters from her family reminded her of duty, while the McKinnons expected obedience and decorum. One afternoon, Marian ventured out into the snow with Asher. He insisted, gently teasing her that she could not remain cooped up forever. Snowflakes danced around them, melting on their scarves and coats. Asher laughed, a deep, throaty sound that made Marian's heart flutter. "You always fear what you do not know," he said, eyes glinting in the winter light. "And you?" Marian asked, arching an eyebrow. "Do you fear me?" He stopped, studying her, and for a heartbeat the mountains themselves seemed to hold their breath. "I fear losing myself in you," he confessed, his voice low and urgent. Marian's chest tightened. The words hung between them like fragile glass. She reached for his hand, letting their fingers intertwine, warmth against the cold. For a moment, the snow around them seemed to disappear, leaving only the two of them in the world. Their first kiss in the snow was slow and unhurried, lips brushing, hearts thundering. It was a kiss that promised more, a promise of desire, devotion, and secrets shared only in whispers. Back in the mansion, nights were spent by the fire, sharing stories and dreams. One evening, Asher guided Marian to a hidden alcove in the grand library, a small nook with a window that looked out onto the valley. Candles flickered, casting shadows that danced across their faces. "You make everything brighter," Marian murmured, tracing the curve of her cheek with his thumb. Marian's breath caught. "And you? Make me feel alive," she replied, her voice trembling. They leaned closer, and the air between them shimmered with anticipation. Every brush of skin sent shivers down her spine. Asher's hands framed her face, drawing her nearer until their lips met in a deep, lingering kiss. It was no longer tentative. Desire had found its voice, but it was tempered by tenderness and reverence.
The night stretched on, the fire crackling and snow swirling outside as they explored the intimacy of closeness, whispers, and soft touches. Every heartbeat spoke louder than words ever could, and both realized that their love was no longer a secret, even if the world remained.
Winter began to wane, but Ravenshallow remained cold, the valley alive with icy streams and frozen cliffs. Marian and Asher took to exploring the high ridges, walking hand in hand along narrow paths where the snow crunched beneath their boots. "You trust me?" Asher asked suddenly, stopping at a cliff's edge, the wind tugging at their cloaks. Marian met his gaze. "With everything," she replied, without hesitation. Their lips met again, a kiss fueled by weeks of growing passion, trust, and longing. The mountains bore witness, silent and eternal, as the two young lovers clung to each other against the icy wind. That night they returned to the mansion with cheeks flushed, hands entwined, and hearts full. Ravenshallow seemed to shrink around them, leaving only warmth, desire, and the slow-burning embers of a love neither had expected but both had always craved. Even in love, shadows lingered. Letters arrived from Marian's family, urging her to consider the practicalities of their union. The McKinnons, too, reminded Asher of his duty to uphold the family legacy. One evening, Marian found herself pacing the library, uncertainty gnawing at her. Asher approached quietly, pulling her into an embrace from behind. "You fear the world," he whispered. "And I fear losing you," she admitted, voice muffled against his chest. He lifted her face to his, gray eyes stormy yet soft. "Then stay with me. Here, in this valley, the world cannot touch us. Let the mountains guard us, as they always have." Marian's heart melted. She pressed herself closer, letting the warmth of his body soothe the cold ache of doubt. That night, their love became undeniable, each touch and kiss a vow unspoken but deeply felt. Spring approached slowly, but in Ravenshollow, snow lingered on the peaks. Marian and Asher had grown inseparable. Every morning he awoke with a smile for her. Every evening she fell asleep knowing he would be there. One night, under the soft glow of candlelight, Asher took her hands in his, eyes intense. "Marian, I cannot imagine a life without you." Tears filled her eyes. "Nor can I," she whispered. And in that quiet, intimate room they sealed their devotion. Their love, once tentative and cautious, became fierce, passionate, and unyielding. Every kiss, every touch, every whispered promise bound them together beyond duty, beyond obligation, beyond even the mountains that had brought them together. The valley of Ravenshollow remained timeless, silent, and secretive, but within the walls of the McKinnon mansion, two hearts had awakened fully, and the world, vast and uncertain,